Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your zen of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee or a delicious menu item while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Come by and say hello to Maui. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
Hi everyone, Daphne Lage here. Join Nita Lanning and me on the Ragin' 2 The Vlogs show, where we talk about everything, nothing, and all the bits in between. Looking for hour-long conversations about indie comics, social media marketing, and crowdfunding, with the occasional rant and story time? Head on over to the Ragin' 2 channel on YouTube, Mondays through Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern to join in the chat.
Hit the button.
And good evening, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, myopic proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, and I answer the phones for Critical Blast Consultings. And of course, if you've been watching for any length of time, I am your humble host here for the Critical Blast podcast, and we do this pretty much every night except Fridays because I need a break. I see enough of you guys, but no. We do the podcast interviews every Monday through Thursday night. We do the LCS guys show every other Saturday night, and of course Sunday night is our open topic night, which usually involves the same cast of characters coming around and just shooting the bull about comics and what's going on in the news. And if you tuned into that, then you know that one of our regulars is Mike Walters, who comes in with his opinions, and we can chat with him for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours. It can go on and on and on. Mike comes to us from the MIKESTAND, which is his own YouTube channel, where he has a unique take on the pop culture podcast world, as well as, learning about comics from the very beginning. But I'm not going to tell you any more about that. Let's let Mike come in and tell you a little bit more about that. Mike, how you doing tonight, man?
All right. How about yourself, RJ?
If I was doing any better, I'd probably get pulled over for a sobriety test.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they figure that you figured that if you appear too happy to people, they might think you've been sipping a bit of the fire water, as it were, right?
You look just a little too happy. You're doing a little too well, man. So how long have you been on our show, man? It's been like almost a year.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably been that. You know, I've had a YouTube account since 2013. Okay, but I didn't actually start uploading videos until about 3 years ago. You know, as you know, I'm sure you may remember, at least in the world of anime and all that, what happened about 3 years ago.
Oh yeah,
the Vic Mignogna story.
So is that what motivated you to start podcasting? Was the Vic Mignogna story?
Yeah, in part. So this is basically what happened. You know, as that story was starting up and stuff like that, of course, I started. Now I had met Vic before, so I kind of knew who he was. So what they were saying about him, I kind of knew. Okay, wasn't as bad as they were trying to make it sound. And of course, with that, I would start looking up a bunch of YouTubers. That's how I met a bunch. That's how I met and started watching a bunch of them, including that Umbrella Guy, Tug, Yellow Flash, Nick Rekieta, Hiro Hay, SG Sammy, Super Saiyan Paul, DNA Crows, Toy Bounty Hunter.
They were all very active around the whole Vic Mignogna defamation case.
Yes, they were. And the actual like spark, the actual thing that actually lit the fire under my rear end, as it were, to actually start uploading videos was basically Yellow Flash was hosting a live stream at one point where he had a bunch of the guys in there. And of course, one of the things I was looking into, a lot of people, you probably heard a few people were doing their own investigations into certain aspects of the story. But one of the things I was looking into was which VAs were like for Vic, which VAs were against him, that kind of thing. I was looking into that. And during that particular live stream, I looked up one of the VAs I was looking up at the time as I was watching was a guy by the name of Illick Guardiola. Okay. Who was a VA who started out with ADV, much like Vic and Monica did. And I was just trying to now. For those who don't know, Illick, let's just say that it was one of the early signs of just how hypocritical a lot of these people who were trying to quote unquote cancel Vic were, because the thing that I had discovered in all that was that Illick had actually dated Monica. Now, why that was such a big deal, especially at that time, was for those of you who don't know, Illick was actually arrested. He was actually arrested for being in a relationship with a 16-year-old girl. A 16-year-old girl who happened to be his student in a drama class. Okay. The only reason he didn't end up in jail, though, was because he ended up marrying the girl, and the girl and her mother chose not to cooperate with the police. So that was basically the gist of it, and we've heard of a few other stories involving some voice actors who actually did get into, we've heard of a couple voice actors and the brother of another voice actress who had gotten, busted. But, basically, as you know, RJ, because you've now known me, as you said, for the last year, and as I've been involved with the open mic night and all that, I'm the type of guy I want to participate. I feel like I have a lot I can contribute. And I wanted to be able, I would love it if Flash or Tug would invite me on for a panel. It just didn't happen.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it just didn't happen. So I figured, okay, and when I brought the story of Illick to their attention, y'all probably were going, yeah, send me the link. Send me that link, Mike. And, and I sent it and they were like, yes, it's like, and it was exciting see that I was able to kind of help him dig something up. And, I realized, I want to be part of this conversation too. I think and we've talked about this before. I'm not I'm not as comfortable with some of the quote unquote technical aspects of some of this stuff. I'm very low tech when it comes to the actual operations and stuff like that. But I went, and technically my channel is my name. The MIKESTAND is just the name of the show I do, and it's actually the name of one of my playlists. I have a number of playlists. So basically, how I got started, of course, was I have a playlist called "On the Mic," like being on the mic, as it were,
right?
On the microphone. Yeah. And those were more standalone videos. So I don't know if it was a few months or maybe even up to a year or so before I actually started live streaming. But I was doing like a lot of people. I was doing like the standalone videos, kind of like what Tug does. I don't know if you're subscribed to Tug or Yellow Flash or anything like that. You get up in the morning and you see that they're posting videos up talking about whatever. I was doing basically the same thing at first. And after a while, I felt like I wanted to start doing live streaming because I felt like, because one of the things I obviously wanted to do was to, I wanted to engage people in conversations. I didn't want to just report on stuff. I wanted to get people engaged and get the conversation going. And not always about one of the things that, granted, I would hit the hard news stuff, and there are some things that I hit that would have been somewhat controversial, just given my commentary and stuff like that, because as as I've talked about before, I'm on the spectrum, so my brain kind of processes things a little differently.
Sure.
But I sit there and I with more well thought out process, wanted to give some commentary, give it from a perspective of maybe not as much from an emotional sense, just really just taking a step back and looking at the situation and really, so, but as I said, I went from doing like the standalone videos. There were a couple other things, one of the things that I wanted to do with my channel as well, from the very beginning, when I did start to upload videos and stuff like that, I wanted to be somewhat different from everybody else in a way, focusing more on the positive. It doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't going to give legit critique when it's called for. It's not, and it's not like we're not going to call out bad behavior when it calls for it.
Sure.
But if as you yourself have seen, there are a lot of YouTubers out there where it's like drama drives, right?
Yes, it does.
Drama seems to drive, and there's more. One of the things I wanted to do right from the jump is one of the things I wanted to try to focus on was rather than demote, I wanted to promote. You understand what I mean?
I do. You're not out there looking for any drama, not trying to tear down. Although, it's hard not to look like tearing down when you were doing the Vic Mignogna stuff, because you're taking a side, which
right.
A lot of times, if you're promoting Vic Mignogna, to do that at that particular juncture, you had to talk about what the other side was doing and what they were like, and what their baseless.
And I did have to analyze, certain, every time they came out with another quote unquote piece of evidence, you had to pick that apart and really analyze it, and not to necessarily say that that I thought Vic was totally in the right in every situation. I for the most part, most of the stuff I basically saw his point of view on. If there was maybe one thing that I thought, okay, yeah, maybe he shouldn't have done that, it was this one video where they showed him from like 2013 at a con with that little girl who dressed in a Wonder Woman. He was serving as a master of ceremonies for a cosplay contest.
I remember that video. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was this little girl, maybe 3 to 5 years old, who came out in a Wonder Woman contest. And he kind of made the comment, what are you doing after the show? That's probably the only thing where I would say, okay, yeah, Vic, maybe you shouldn't have said that. That, granted, I get Nick and Yellow Flash and a lot of people who defended Vic in that situation. I get the whole idea of the whole dad joke thing. But even back then, the environment just wasn't, everybody just automatically assumed that there was something more insidious. But even
that's if you wanted to. I mean, that kind of a joke, is basically it's not even a joke. It's two levels of communication. It's one saying your daughter is very beautiful, and then you make the joke, what are you doing after the show? Because haha, it's funny. Obviously she's 3. You're not going out with her. You're just commenting that she looked very pretty. But yeah, it's now people are looking for that kind of thing. And quite honestly, frequently it's people who are already engaged in that kind of thing, looking to make sure that attention is always elsewhere. But that's another show.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to make one more comment about that, then we can move on. But more towards the girl's parents. One of the other things I criticized in that situation as well is why would the parents, especially now, Grant, I know that maybe a lot of people today don't know the publication history of Wonder Woman like you and I do, or like people who are a little bit more in the in the know.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would have been very critical of that girl's parents. Why are they letting their 3 to 5 year old out dressed like that? That's just kind of asking for, because of the world we live in today. It's asking for attention that you probably don't really want, if you get what I mean. Anyways, as you said, we can move on from that. But that last point I just wanted to make right there. Okay.
So did you start getting any pushback on the videos that you started? I mean, were they getting any kind of a notice about, from the kick Vic or the?
Not really. No, nobody was really coming after me too hard. But then again, I'm still, I'm up to at this point. I mean, even back then, I wasn't even at 100 subscribers yet. I'm just at 100, probably because I'm so small that people barely notice me. Aside from like the little pockets, like with you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I haven't got any kind of pushback or the only real pushback I think I got was and I can't even remember the individual's name right now, but there was this one person that we talked about who and it did kind of lead only because of the situation. I don't remember the person's name. I still have the video up. If you want to go back, but it wasn't because of the situation. It was more because of interpretations of why you're following Vic. Knowing Vic as a Christian guy, the point I was making about the situation was, if the person was truly repentant, and
right.
then you should at least give them a chance. But there were people, because this one individual was a person who apparently was a transgendered individual. They went through the change, but supposedly, I guess as a child, it's like at 12 years old or something like that, they ended up doing something very very naughty to a younger cousin or something like that. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. I don't remember the person's name, but I was one of the last people to defend them, because I was going on the point of, at least up until until a few people finally showed me, hey, look, they're not truly repentant. You should give them the benefit of the doubt. That's what being Christian's all about. And I was arguing that Vic would have been arguing the same thing. Being a good, faithful Christian as he was. So,
So at one point, all the stand with Vic, kick Vic stuff, it died out. It's it's still there. I'm sure there's all kinds of legal stuff still happening slowly and quietly and under the scenes. Nobody cares about. So you were left without a hot topic really to express things on, but a show that you had gotten used to doing, I guess.
Well, yeah. I was already kind of mentally preparing that idea. I think even by the time I was live streaming, I was already starting to make that transition, albeit it would be eventually what led to the Friday. Now, as you know now, the way the show is formatted, Monday through Thursday, I do kind of a niche newscast,
right?
And then Friday, I do the historical comic retrospective with my senior mod Batco. Okay. Initially, when I first started live streaming, I had subtitles for each night. I had the MIKESTAND, the Dayton, and Monday Machinations, Tuesday Talks, and all the way to Friday night forum. Now, initially, the Friday show I was wanting to try to make into like a panel show, like what we do on Sunday.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Now the thing was, of course, was the people I knew at the time, though. It's like, now, I knew people were busy, so I knew I wasn't going to have the same people on every week, nor was I going to plan to try to. But, the only people I could actually get onto the show were the Knuckleheads.
I'm aware of the Knuckleheads. Yes.
Yeah, the Crumbion and Mr. Hop. That's how Mr. Hop knew who I was, and that's how I eventually met you.
Right, because Mr. Hop was on our show one night.
And what's kind of funny about that was, even though I kind of heard of you, I hadn't really developed interest yet,
and nobody had. Nobody still
and,
does.
Yeah, now the thing is that I would have me online, and I get a message on Facebook from one of my other mods, Action Toys channel. He's all going, hey, Mr. Hop is talking about you on this channel. And, that's when, of course, came over, and then you, of course, let me in, and we got to know each other, and, kind of things just kind of snowballed there between you and me anyways, in terms of, and of course, our rapport has always been good. Our, friendship rapport has always been good, even though there have been, we've had, not you between you and I, but obviously other people have
been rough patches,
right?
Not with us, but
yeah, that's basically what I was trying to get at. So as you said, eventually the Vic stuff died down. So what was I going to do now? Well, as I said, I transitioned to kind of a nightly newscast, and with that. Now, the idea was and having it as a live stream too, what I wanted to do was, as you know, I always want to try to encourage conversation, So as I'm reading this now, Grant, I don't, for the most part, I don't always just read the stories. I'll also obviously give my commentary and stuff. And, I will, for more editorial type stuff, opinion pieces, more bigger news, I will usually go more to I'll go to more like Bounding into Comics. That'll probably be my primary source. I've done stories from your site as well. I've done stories from Neannet, which is a site that's done by Hiro Hay. And then I use CBR for more lighter pieces like stuff. I still will use like your site and Bounding into Comics for some of the lighter stuff like releases, reviews, trailers, that kind of stuff, or sometimes profile pieces. Now, what I mean by profile piece, it's like with CBR, for example, like with some of the anime articles I may read, like one of the ones I read, like might have been this last week or within the past 2 weeks, where the top 10 anime characters who would be friends with Draco Malfoy, or or like the top 5 isekai titles, or how to read and watch this particular anime, or as you know, I know you don't follow anime as much, but Spy Family has been a big one they've been talking a lot about.
I've heard a lot of people trying to controversialize Spy Family, but
yeah, and it's usually the same crowd we've been dealing with. So and a lot of times as I'm reading the articles, a lot of times I hope to have a lively chat. I hope people are engaged as I'm reading it, and then I always encourage people, if they have something they want to add to the conversation or ask about, go ahead and do it in the chat, and if I can answer questions, I have an answer for them, I'll do my best to do that. Now sometimes of course there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of news out there. You know how news cycles work. Sometimes
the slow news.
Yeah. So, which of course leads into how I eventually started the historical comic retrospect. Now, since I wasn't really getting much on the forum idea, the Friday night forum, getting people to come in and participate. Now, what happened is, it happened on a Wednesday. In fact, there was this one Wednesday where couldn't really find any major anything to really talk about news wise, and I just so happened to have on my mind Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. So instead of doing like a typical newscast, I decided to do a little profile piece on Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Now, let me ask you something here, RJ. For most people, even layman fans who might have some idea, when most people hear the names Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, what comes to mind? What's the first thing that usually comes to most people's minds when they hear the names Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster?
Oh yeah, they're naturally going to jump right to Superman.
Right. But what I discovered through some of my previous studies of DC history was that they actually were, as I've said before, Siegel and Shuster were probably one of the more prolific comic book creative duos of the 30s there. Because even before Superman debuted in Action Comics #1, cover date June 1938, approximate on sale date April 18th, 1938, they had Slam Bradley, they had Dr. Occult, they had Bart Regan Spy, they'd have Federal Men with Steve Carson, they had Radio Squad, they had Henri Duval. In fact, DC's first crossover wasn't even a superhero crossover. It was in, I don't remember the exact issue at the moment, but it was in one of the teen numbers of New Adventure Comics.
Okay.
The crossover was Radio Squad, guest starring, doing a cameo in a Federal Men story involving the junior Federal Men, talking about driving safety, traffic safety. So
PSA, and they just brought all their characters together, or several characters together into it.
Right. So anyway, so there was this one Wednesday, as I said, couldn't find anything to cover, so I decided to focus on Siegel and Shuster and talked a bit about some of the other works they had done, and as another little tidbit, which of course is all what led to how I'm doing the historical comic retrospect now. To give them a sample of what, I read the Slam Bradley story from Detective Comics Volume 1, Number 1. the very first one involving Fuyuan Yui, and the introduction, of course, of Slam and Shorty and all that. And the guys were like, "Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's cool," And it got me to thinking, this sounds like something that might work out. Now, of course, this is also was to give a little bit more background to the the idea of the historical retrospect. As I've told you this now. I've told you this before. I didn't necessarily grow up reading cartoons. I grew up watching Super Friends and all that. That's what sparked my interest in DC and Marvel. Was watching the cartoons growing up, and so what got me more interested in trying to look more into like DCU is the idea. Now, RJ, when you were growing up, when you were reading comics growing up, who were like two or three of your favorites growing up?
Oh, I was definitely a DC guy. So
Yeah.
I was all over the Bat family.
Which two or three characters would you say were your favorites?
Definitely Batman, Batgirl, Man-Bat, the Spectre.
Okay. Now, as you were reading those stories and growing up, wasn't there at least a part of you that wished you could have interacted with them or maybe connected with them the way like you and I are connecting right now?
Well, I think so, because that's the whole point of writing a good story, is to make the reader identify with the characters in there and care about them, especially if they're franchise characters that are going on and on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and we've talked about this before. I'm sure like we've all had that point in time where now you and I, as guys who are more versed in DC, we're aware of a character named Axis, who is kind of the doorway guy to now Grant, I know within the comics I think he's just simply the doorway between like the DCU and the MCU, Marvel Comics universe. But what if for a moment those powers were expanded to include all comic book universes, and what if he did give you the option to basically be able to venture into any comic book universe you wanted to, and live your life in that universe and be able to interact with those characters?
Oh,
I know that's a little bit metaphysical, and I know that's really stretching the imagination, but that's the kind of thing that's one of the things I kind of really get into. What would it be like to interact with those characters as if they were real? So I want to give you a chance to say something if you want to ask something or say something.
No, I'm just thinking it would be, you'd want to keep your mouth shut, because as soon as everybody knew that you knew everything about all the characters there, all the people in that universe, you'd either be locked up for the protection of the heroes, or you'd be kidnapped by the villains so that they could find out everything about the heroes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, but the whole idea would be you wouldn't just acknowledge that, but my point being is that I'm sure we all have wanted to connect with those characters, whether they now, granted, you and I, it'd obviously be DC. Now I did this more with the DCU because for myself. But when I decided to do it on Fridays, and when I decided to do the historical comic retrospect on Fridays, like, okay, first off, if you have a desire, let's say, to move to another universe like that, right? DCU, MCU, whatever it is, wouldn't it make sense to learn everything you possibly could about that universe? Learn everything, especially if you want to make the experience as full as possible. Watching them progress over time, knowing where everything is, like geography wise, knowing where like Bialea is, in Europe, you know,
Right.
or Kasnia, or you know, or where Central City, Missouri is, you'd want to know, and you'd want to also like I'd even try to figure out like date of birth so I can keep track of their ages as I'm reading the comics as well, you know, because obviously as you're interacting with people and stuff like you want you want to be able to watch it over time. Hence the idea of you've kidded me before. I know when we talked about this before, you say, well, when most people ask how to get into comics, we might say like, oh, look at Dark Knight Returns or Frank Miller or what have you. Mike goes all the way back to the very beginning, and because that idea of following of watching, the idea of learning about those universes as fully as possible, watching it from the very beginning and watching it progress over time, watching learning as much as you can about the characters, their relationships, how they age.
Oh man, I feel sorry for you when you start seeing the universe get all messed up too, because you're gonna be invested heavily by that point.
Well, yeah. Well, now the thing is though, is when I was doing my DC work, I'd started, of course, back in 1935 with New Fun #1, and got all the way up into the early 60s before my brain was just burnt out. Now, mind you, I know, like as I say, you and I, DC is our universe, but not everybody's into DC. Some people are into Marvel. Some people might, if you were to ask some of these same questions I just posed to you about, about like, if you could, then, if you could venture into another universe, what universe would it be? For you and me, that answer would probably be DCU. Whereas for others, some may be Marvel. Some it may be Archie comics. Some it may be Dell Goldkey. Some it may be Charlton. Some it may be Harvey comics. Some it may be Dark Horse. Some it may be, Image. All these different companies have their own, even if they don't always market it as such, right? Um, I think DC and Marvel, as far as I know, are really the only two people talked about that have like one shared universe. Many of the other comic book titles we talked, like you could argue Archie does, because Archie has like Archie, Sabrina,
Yeah,
that kind of.
they all live together.
Yeah, but for the most part, most of the comic book companies you would think don't really have one shared universe. But even in ones that don't, you can still try to build one, because as I'm as we we just as I probably told you before, we just finished 1938 last night. So starting next Friday, we're going to be starting in the 1939, which things will really be picking up there. Now, which leads into another segue here of one of the things I was going to, of course, talk about a bit was, I'm sure you want to know how I actually decide which stories to.
Well, there are a lot of books to pick from, and you can't show them all without sacrificing Monday through Thursday nights and just doing them every night that way. So you gotta pick and choose which books you're going to do.
Right. And I'm sure you probably want to. I'm sure you and other people would like to know the method to the madness, as it were.
If there is any, sure.
Huh?
If there is a method, I just figured it might be the books.
Well, there is. There is. I mean, okay, so at least early on, again, based on from what I had learned from from my previous studies of DCU, in the early days of in the 33 through 33 through 37, 38, the books were primarily anthologies.
Right.
And now actually starting as early as 37 with Detective Comics, who's one of the first ones. But for the most part, okay, so you have two type of, from my research, there's two type of anthologies that they were doing. There were what I call a hodgepodge anthology, which is basically an anthology where you have basically just a general mix of a bunch of different genres. You have some humor in there. You have some action adventure. You'd have some, you'd have a little bit of a mix of everything in there. They're kind of a hodgepodge. That's what, when adventure comics started out, new comics, for example, they were more of a hodgepodge. You'd have some comedy stuff. You'd have some anthropomorphic stuff. You'd have some harder stuff like some detective stories, some sci-fi, westerns, whatever genre you could think of.
Yeah, they were all there.
Yeah, early on. And then, of course, with, I think, Detective Comics was actually one of the first what I called themed anthologies, in which it was an anthology in which they focused kind of on a specific theme. Now, one of the other differences between the hodgepodge anthologies and the themed anthologies, the hodgepodge anthologies pretty much were there from the beginning. And when they were starting out, you'd have like 30 plus stories with about an average page count of like about 2 pages a feature, 2 pages per feature.
Yeah.
Okay. And but when you start getting the themed anthologies, you may have only 7 or 8 features, but they'd have about an average of 7 to 8 pages on average. Because obviously now the writing style, and again, depending upon the books too, depending upon what they were doing, because with a lot of those hodgepodge anthologies too, they were heavily reliant on reprints, on new, reprints of new. In fact, a couple of like United Feature Syndicate and King Feature Syndicate. These were companies that would sell, that would provide comic strips to the newspapers. And then in the case of United Feature Syndicate, which we covered yesterday, covered a couple of the comics that that went on sale in December of 38 yesterday. They would, of course, put their stuff in comic book form. And then King Feature Syndicate, which was like Popeye, Flash Gordon, Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, they were in David McKay publications. Okay. So to kind of give you an idea here, at the end of 1938, okay, let me take it back even a little bit further. Okay. At the end of 1937, you had 7 companies, 7 publishers, publishing a grand total, not each, a grand total between all 7 companies of 16 books.
Okay.
Okay. Through the end of 1937, the most prolific company at the time was Centaur. They were publishing 4 regular books: Funny Pages, Funny Picture Stories, Star Comics, and Star Ranger Funnies, which was, I think, Star Ranger Comics at the time. You had, I think it was 2 or 3 that were still only publishing 1. Eastern Color, Famous Funny. Yeah, I think it was at least 2. And then Quality Comics had just started up in late 37 with Feature Funnies, which would eventually become Feature Comics. Okay? So you had 7 companies publishing 16 books. Total. Not each, total. And I say that because if you remember, we got, on when I was pointing that out one night on one of our open topic nights, people thought I was saying, each, and it wasn't each, it was total.
Yeah, there weren't that many books out there.
Huh?
There weren't that many titles out there. They were selling a great many number of units, and that's what caused them to put more titles out there. But initially, this was an experiment,
right? Exactly.
To keep the presses going.
And the fact is, a lot of the comic book creators at the time, including Siegel and Schuster, would use pseudonyms, in the event that it didn't go well. Well, at the end of 37, you had 7 companies publishing 16 titles total. Okay. By the end of 38, you had 8 companies publishing a grand total of 24 titles.
Yep.
So you had a net gain of 1 company and 8 titles. So you could tell, and a lot of this growth was due in part to, of course, the debut of Superman, because that was kind of the birth of the themed anthology. Well,
that was the publication of Superman, and the reaction to it was that was Sutter's Mill for comics, right there. It was like, there's gold here. Let's everybody head out this way, and mine our own superhero.
Yeah, and so at the end of 38, right, as I told you, there were 8 companies publishing 24 books. Those companies were Centaur, which was by that point was publishing 6 titles, a net of 6 titles. They had some titles that they started up during the year, but by the end of the year were also done. The 6 titles for Centaur at that point were Funny Picture Stories, Funny Pages, Star Comics, Star Ranger Funnies, Keen Detective Stories, and Amazing Mystery Funnies. You had Dell Comics, which was publishing 5 books, which were Popular Comics, The Funnies, The Comics, Super Comics, and Crackerjack Funnies.
Yeah.
DC, which of course is now one of the big 2, was only by the end of 38 was only publishing 4 titles at that time: Action, Detective, Adventure Comics, and More Fun. Those 4 titles. And of course, this is still a point where Adventure and More Fun were still more the hodgepodge anthologies. Action and Detective were the 2 titles that were the themed anthologies, as I talked about. And then you had David McKay Publications and United Features by the end of 38, now publishing 3 books. David McKay was King Comics, Ace Comics, and Feature Book. And Feature Book was the first of a special type of book. And United Features would start their own version of it called Single Series, where these books, and I talked a little bit about this on last night's show with Single Series too, these were their first attempt at a singular feature monthly book.
Okay.
As we talked about, there were at the time we knew that, as I told you at the time, they were primarily anthologies. Now, David McKay Publications was the first to do this, where it was basically just a set of unrelated one-shots. But what they would do is, with each issue, they would focus on a specific character. And now, usually with reprints, usually they'll do like a panel or a month's work of panels. With like the books like Feature Book, they do like a full, maybe half or a full story arc. So that and then United Feature Syndicate had, of course, 3 titles, which was Tip Top Comics, Comics on Parade, and now with David McKay in particular, here's one of the issues I ran into is that with the sources I do have, I can't actually get into reading any of the comics because they're basically not available. There's no site that has those specific comics.
Okay.
So for the most part, with that one, I'll go to like GCD, Grand Comics Database, and I'll read off the summaries. But so there were 3 there, and then there were 3 companies that were just still doing 1 title at the end of 38, with Eastern Color was still only doing one title, Famous Funnies. Famous Funnies is actually the first regular comic book. It came about in like 1934.
So as the number of publications continue to increase, and I don't want to derail.
I know I'm a little long-winded, and we're already at 50 minutes.
You're starting to do your show, which is where you teach people about the comics history, but with the number of titles increasing, what we haven't answered the question is how you pick.
Yeah, I know, and I am getting to that. You know me, I'm a little long-winded at times.
I know. I got to jump you down to that point because it's like we can see the extrapolation of all the titles, and I'm like, by the time you get to 1940, you're going to have to start rolling dice and picking things.
Well, no, okay. So going. Well, it's important to understand. It's important for me to go through those just because there's one other aspect that goes into my decision-making process. So Centaur and DC, they have almost exclusively at that point, they almost exclusively had original content.
Okay.
Dell, most of the other stuff was still relying heavily on reprint material, even though Quality Comics was doing a mix of original and reprints. So this is kind of how I do it. So now, since obviously the superhero genre is the big one that everybody's into, right? And that's the one that a lot of people want to really focus on if they want to venture into another universe. So with those, like I guess the best way to go is DC, because DC right now is the one that has the most in that. So I'll go through and I'll look, okay, which story, now some like for example, Fiction House, which has Sheena, Gilda Gay, and now that's the other one that only has one title that it's running. Okay, so I focus primarily on Sheena of the Jungle, Gilda Gay, and the Weird Stories of Supernatural, The Secret Diary of Doctor. Those are the three, and then I may hit the other one. Now, with more the like superhero stuff or more the ones that are universe building, I'll tend to read more, at each issue, but I will pick depending upon certain situations. Like I'll look at the stories. I'll look, okay, is a superhero, let's say, are they facing one of their major enemies, or is there something interesting like one of the stories I'm doing right now with DC is Superman. Like, okay, so the last time I did DC, and I'll be doing DC this week as well. I'm doing the Superman and Tex Thompson story. Now, normally I wouldn't do two large stories like that because I want to try to divide it out as much as I can. But these two were significant because in the case of the Superman story, one, it was the first mention of his super hearing stated in the story as sensitive ears. It's the one where I told you it, but one of the other aspects about it too that really caught my attention with that one was it also showed you kind of compare and contrast between how Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster dealt with societal woes versus how the writers of today are handling societal woes. And we got into all that before, but but I still decided to do that story. And since it's a two-part, I'll be finishing up that. And then I also picked the Tex Thompson story, for example, because of a common trope from back then. The Tex Thompson story I'm reading, I read this last time and this time, Dr. Kit-Chung's Ape Army. That whole idea of transferring a human brain from into an ape, that was a common theme back then. So common themes, whether or not, if a particular character that it is, maybe an introduction, a first, or, stuff like that, So with the more world building, that's the stuff I kind of look for. And in the process, of course, you learn things. Like I learned that under a pseudonym, Jack Kirby was a major player with Fiction House early on. This is still before he created Fantastic Four, still before created New Gods. The very early days of his, he under the pseudonym Kurt Davis, he was writing the weird stories of Supernatural, the Secret Diary of Dr. Hayward stories in Jumbo Comics. Okay.
Yeah, he and Will Eisner were both using both pioneers in the industry, and they were both using pseudonyms before they came into their own in the comics industry.
Now, with the reprint material, as we talked about, of course, obviously, we don't really have the time to read everything.
Right. You got to pick the stories out of the book too.
And I do want to give like a sampling of the stories. So with the reprint material, like the reprint materials remind me a lot of cartoons because the characters are pretty much stagnant. It's like the characters are the same as time goes on. They don't age. There's no real story that develops over time. There's no real character development. They're just, they're like cartoons. It's like watching a Bugs Bunny or a Yogi Bear cartoon. So with those, what I do is I go with what I call the Milestone Method, because I still want to give samples, because there are things you can look at in those stories too. There are things like how people use language, how people use words, and all that. So what I would do with those, with the reprint stuff, and with maybe more slice of life stuff or what have you, is I'd go with what I call the Milestone Method, which so I would obviously would focus on first issue,
right?
And from there, like up to issue 30, I'd go like every 5 issues, every 5th issue, I would go in and I would kind of just randomly focus on whatever features grabbed my attention at the time. Obviously with quality, with the fact that they're a little bit more of a mix there. We have original materials, like I'm covering The Clock and Espionage with Black X, but also you have the reprints there, so I might cover those, kind of after I covered the 2 main ones.
Right. They were just trying to fill in the pages.
Yeah. So basically up through issue 30 of a particular book, I may go every 5th issue. And then from let's say from issue 30 to maybe issue 100, it'd be every 10th and or 25th issue. So it'd be like the 40th, 50th, because I still want to give a sample, but doing every 5th issue for every, that would take a while too.
Absolutely.
The idea is to give people a sample and give people an idea of what, how things were back then as compared to how they are now. As I said, through the first 30 issues, you go every 5th issue, 30 to 100, every 10th to 25th issue, then maybe from like 100 to 300 or so, maybe it's every 25th issue, then beyond that, maybe every 50th issue. Obviously, I haven't got that high yet with any of the counts, but you kind of get the idea,
Yeah. And folks, when when Mike does the Friday night show with the comic retrospective, you actually get to read along with this. He's got the screen shared there. He's going through an app that shows these Golden Age comics, and he's doing the voices. So you it's not just a dry read of this. It's almost like a radio play with some comic book panels.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I'm doing the historical comic retrospect, I'm trying to do a little bit. First off, my goal is to make it as real I want to make the experience for people as real and personal as possible. I want people when they come in and they sit there and they listen along and they read along and stuff like that, I want them to feel like they're going through that dimensional hole with me. That's
right.
So, and we do as you said, it's not a dry read. I do the voices, and do all that, and aside from that, we all, in terms of the analysis side of it, we do comparative social commentary. We look at, okay, how things were back, what was considered acceptable, what was considered acceptable back then versus what would be considered acceptable now. In fact, we talked a lot about the whole aspect of minstrels. In fact, Backgoat helped me learn what a minstrel show actually was. I just simply thought it was just simply a variety show. But I did not know until Backgoat had to kind of explain it to me that it had a little bit of a dark. It was like basically there was a little bit more of a derogatory meaning to it. I wasn't getting that, but he eventually got through to me. We look at word and language usage analysis. You were co-hosting with me a couple weeks ago, or a few weeks ago, when we came upon that word nebby. You don't hear the word nebby a whole lot. Another word that I remember was used in Action Comics Volume 1, Number 7, where Jimmy Olsen was first introduced. Surreptitious. When was the last time you heard the word surreptitious or surreptitiously in a comic book?
Yeah, in a comic book for sure.
Yeah,
outside of that, I hear it more frequently. But
yeah, but in a comic, but you kind of get what people spoke more formally back then. Do word and language usage analysis. And one of the things about having Backgoat as a co-host, as my senior mod in particular, is he's a former Navy corpsman, a former paramedic, and he's a multiple history buff. He's into aeronautical history. He's into U.S. history, military history, all that. So he has a wealth of things he can comment on and give differing viewpoints on. And of course, he also has an inflation calculator to where we can look at, okay, like when we look at the ad pages and we see like a pea shooter was like $1 back in 1938. What would that be now? That's another thing we do. And we do again, and we do one, and we will at times also do a typical, reader's comprehension type of activity when, as we're reading the story, we'll look at, okay, well, what do you think is happening here? Where do you think this is going? And you've been there with me when I've done that too before.
Yes, I have.
And what usually happens most of the time, don't I even though I had not actually read the stories before, mind you, it's almost like I usually pick up almost immediately what's going on, and I usually will guess and the next panel. Usually it's the next panel or two, and I would end up being right. So
that means the foreshadowing is working.
Yeah. So I know we're already just past the hour mark, but I just so a lot of how I choose a story, depending upon the genre and stuff, with stuff where it's world building, I focus more on, I do try, like with world building stuff, I'm gonna obviously read more of the comics, and and I look at the page counts and stuff like that as well, and I do try to get as many of the books in there as possible. Now, granted, as I said, hey, Chris, look who just joined in there.
You like that logo? That's just me playing around on in what do you call that thing? PowerPoint. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a slide made for Mike, and I tore it all up to recreate tonight's thumbnail. But I'm glad you like it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, the only reason that again, I'm not as since I'm not as technically savvy, I'm not as confident in using that. Yeah, you might have an eye for that. That's what Chris was just saying there. But yeah, so basically that's how a lot of, and I think one of the things with what I'm doing with the historical comic retrospect, particularly with Backgoat and me, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking, I didn't grow up reading comics like you did, like maybe Chris did, like some people did. I came from the cartoon background for it.
Right.
Okay. So in essence, I'm reading a lot of these now. But when I was when I was focusing on DC, I would read mostly the synopses because trying to read every comic would have been kind of a bit more difficult. It would have been quite a time consuming thing. But let's see. We need to help you because the logo made me want to click it.
I found out I can star comments on here. I have no idea what that means. Does that mean I'm thumbing them up on YouTube when I do that? That's kind of cool. Learning something new all the time in StreamYard.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm trying to.
Oh, I see what it is. It's a subsection of the live comments here. Interesting.
Yeah.
So backing away from the comic retrospective, obviously the bulk of your show is Monday through Thursday when you're doing the niche news, where you dig into anime, you dig into comics, and you dig into wrestling because they do all three fit together. What I find interesting is that you do all this without a guest, without doing interviews with people talking about stuff, which mad respect, man, because I've tried to do the solo thing before where I just sit here and talk. I can't go past 6 minutes. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, we talked about that. I'm done. Bye. You go an hour. Sometimes you go into 2 hours.
Well, it's kind of interesting. That's part of the reason why I decided to do it live, because when I was still doing the standalone videos, as you were, when I was still doing the standalone videos,
Right.
there are times that just as you pointed out there, it was hard to talk for more than a couple minutes at a time because what can you say? So that's one of the reasons why I started going with the idea of doing more kind of a running commentary style where I'm reading the articles and then commentating, doing the commentary as I'm reading. That's part of the reason why I started doing that more is reading. I'd be reading the articles and then giving a running where I could give commentary. And obviously, with more of the editorial, harder news stuff, obviously there's more we can do comment. We can comment on more there than maybe more the the reviews and the release information, all that. But a lot of it is trying to get the information out there, especially when even a lot of the guys who initially when I started doing this, a lot of the guys were comic, a lot of their content was comics oriented, but some of them have kind of gravitated more towards mainstream media aspect, talking about like Tug, and Flash and all that. Hero Hay still does it does anime and does like internet stuff, but DNA Crows, they split up. That was Dean and Crow. They're brothers. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
I did not.
Yeah, Crows now does Crows of Judgment. Dean, of course, you know about that DA talk. But yeah, so basically that's part of the and as I said, what I do with the news side of it is I'll decide and I'll go through and I'll look news items up, depending upon the set, like I try to fill out an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's usually how I try to do that. So if it's, let's say if it's bounding into comics and or like your site, and I can get through about 6 articles at most.
Hey, Cross Comics, glad you're here, man.
Yeah. Hey, Rick.
So you know how long it takes you to read a story. You got to you can look at word count and say, okay, that takes you got a feel for it by now. So you
more. I mean, I don't sit there and keep track of word count per se. I just have more of that feel of like I know it takes me a little longer to read the stuff from like Downing in the Comics in your site, than it does, let's say, CBR. CBR, they tend to go a little quicker. So whereas I may get up to like six articles through Bounding into Comics and your site, if I was just focusing on CBR, I could get up to like 10 articles pretty easy. And if it's a mix between the two, it might be somewhere around 8 or so, 8 to 10, depending upon how many articles are in each, what I'm focusing on. So that's, and again, with news items, of course, again, I don't just do the big news. It's like I don't just do the articles about cancel culture and Eric, whether or not Eric Larson's going to, delete his Twitter account if Elon Musk buys, or what was going on with Damian Mills. I don't just do
which
those
he did.
Huh?
Which he did, by the way. He deleted it.
And I complimented him on that too. When I covered that story on Thursday, that they had, I basically said, whether you like him or you don't, whether you agree with him or you don't, whether you think he's a genius or an idiot, the one thing you can give the man respect for is that he stuck to his guns.
Yeah, he did what he said he was going to do.
Which a lot of these SJWs don't. You remember how when Trump became president, they were saying, "Well, I'm going to leave the United States. I'm going to move out." They didn't. They didn't follow through. It's a lot of this baloney virtue signaling just to make yourself look cool. It's like, really?
Well, it's a lot easier to delete a Twitter account than it is to pick up and move to Canada.
Well, but not for them. A lot of them have the money to do it.
They probably already have a house there.
That would be harder for somebody like you or me who have more meager earnings.
Yeah.
But, but for them, they have the money to do it, So it's like, that's why that's all BS. But,
Well, this is Saturday, so this is actually your night off. Sunday should be your night off, but you're going to be over here tomorrow night on the open mic night, we hope. Oh yeah, you're right, Chris. They don't want to pay Canadian tax rates. Yeah, it's much cheaper for them to live here in the United States. When do you start planning Monday?
When do I, in terms of what? In terms of like, and also there's, I just remembered there's one other aspect to my shows too that's a little different from everybody else too. That's the this day in Nietzsche history segment.
Yes,
where I actually will put in like little history tidbits, on this day, like 40 years, that kind of thing.
Right.
But like when you ask me when do I plan, like when do I set up my
yeah, you got to do show prep. You got to know what you're going to talk about Monday night. So is that you get up at a certain time on Monday morning and say, okay, let's find the stories.
Okay, so first up, I set the streams up Sunday, like Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, around there. So you usually will see well, you've seen my headers and stuff like that,
Yep.
The MIKESTAND, this date and all that, that stuff, the streams themselves I set up on Sunday. Now, as to when I'm doing like the stories and when I'm doing the setup for the content setup, usually earlier in the day, I'll start looking for the history segments, to where I can just put those in the windows up here. How there's a bunch of windows we use.
Sure.
So I set those up earlier in the day and just leave them up until I'm ready to use them. And then for the actual news items, for the Monday through Thursday shows, I generally will do that usually after I finish watching my own little programming block in the afternoon. And please don't ask me more about that. Don't want to go into too much more detail on that.
All right.
But so that's usually, so my show starts at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central. So it's usually around 4 o'clock, 4:30 when I start looking through Bounding into Comics CBR for the actual stories to read. Picking, okay, well, what stories am I going to read tonight? And for the most part, usually, at least with Bounding into Comics, I will do just about every story. If there are new stories out, there's only a few, let's say, certain names they show up that I won't, certain names involved with the article that I won't do. But other than that, I generally do all the, and you know who I'm probably talking about without having to mention them.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, but
all right.
As for the Friday night show, of course, I'm like with the Friday night show with the comic stuff, the historical comic. I usually am planning, like I basically have the first 3 months of 39 planned out pretty much for what I'm covering. I have through February of 39, like I pretty much know what I'm going to be doing. I still kind of ironing out March of 39, and that coverage. Okay, so the first 3 weeks of May here will be going through January 39. The last week of May and all of June will be doing February of 39, covering February 39, and then the first 4 weeks of July tentatively is March, just adding out some of the details there.
You can take more time putting the Friday shows together because the past isn't going to change all that much.
Right.
Monday through Thursday, stuff could happen during the day that you got to be
right. And I have had stuff where I've actually had to either add a new story, or like I had to make a decision, like yesterday, with when I learned of Neil Adams passing and kind of made a quick mention of him, did a moment of silence for him,
Right.
before I got started. We could hit that. So I mean, you've seen my show, so you know how everything goes. But I just wanted to give people an idea of what I do and all that.
Well, for everybody watching, either live or the replay, you can subscribe to the Mic Stand at the link right below the video. It's the very first. My fingers are not lined up. I don't know why that is. I feel like they're lined up, and I look in the camera, and they're like, I have a descended finger.
Slightly off. Yeah.
There we go. It's down there. First line below the video. Click on that if you are interested at all in wanting to just get a recap of the important news events for the day. That's something you can click in there and get it Monday through Thursday. If you want to get a first reader's perspective of Golden Age comics and find out some of the stuff that you didn't know about. I certainly didn't know Jack Kirby was writing under pseudonyms or Will Eisner, even though I knew these characters. So Mike is not just reading these comics; he's giving you the encyclopedic details and deep dives into what went into them. So definitely,
remember too, with the news, on the news coverage side of it, we're not just I don't just cover hard news either. I cover also release information. I cover like trailer information. Profile pieces. I do a little bit of everything there. So I mean, we have a lot of YouTubers out there who just seem to focus on who's the latest YouTuber, who's the latest person to screw up, or how can we wreck somebody's Kickstarter, how can we wreck somebody's Indiegogo, or we have a lot of people out there who just that's what they do. And that's just not cool. And I'm sure there are people out there, and we have people who focus almost, focus a little bit too much at times on even bigger stories. Sometimes maybe you don't want it. Maybe you don't give a rat's patoot about Johnny Depp. I mean, maybe you understand why it's a big thing, and you may, but you don't want to obsess over it.
Sure.
It's
Once a week is enough for me. It's like, okay, what happened in court this week? Oh, they said this. Okay, got it. But I get that, there are, at the same time, there are people out there who will listen, who are hanging on every single word and nuance of, and every little eye roll.
And again, and one of the things that I've always wanted to do with my channel is give kind of an alternative, try to give a positive alternative to stuff, instead of focusing on some of the big bomb stuff, maybe people just want to hear about what the latest comic coming out, or maybe if you're a fan of a particular, let's say, comic book like George Perez or Carlos Pacheco or Neil Adams, maybe you do want to send your condolences to their families if they've had some tragic news come along. Maybe you want to know of that, because maybe they had an influence on your life and you want to show them that you support them and their family, or
absolutely. All right. Well, Mike, it's been insightful. I knew a lot of this stuff because we have you on all the time, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern for the open topic night, possibly even an open mic night. We'll see how I feel.
So you're still trying to figure out if you're going to just open it up fully or if you're just going to send out the link.
I never know what I'm going to do, Mike. I surprise myself on a daily basis with the things that I do, and I think I'll just keep doing it that way. Folks in the chat, click the link below. Get out there and subscribe to the Mike channel and get in on this news and this comic retrospective.
And thank you for having me. Thank you for having me tonight, by the way.
Glad to do it. Always enjoy talking with you. And everybody else out there, we appreciate you coming in and watching this. We don't have a show if you're not here to watch it. And as always, while you were here, we just hope you had a blast. Good night.